Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Excellencies. It's my pleasure to present to you the results from the Theme 4, Strengthening. Next slide, please. So in the strengthening theme, it has become clear to us and the Science Advisory Board that the research community recognizes the urgent need and existing gaps in capacity building in the Arctic, in education and networking, and both as far as Arctic is concerned, as well as connecting to global communities and providing pathways of support forward. 20% of all submissions to the Science Advisory Board contain elements of strengthening, and they were coming from more than 20 different countries. As you can see, this variety of jurisdictions, variety of locations that were engaged in strengthening, and also variety of topics as depicted by the word clouds on the bottom. Next slide. In particular, strengthening has become a key to Arctic research. It encompasses multiple things, including the following: encouraging and supporting knowledge holders and early career scientists, promoting the image of the Arctic as linked to people's lives and not as a distant and irrelevant place, building capacity in education for Arctic residents, including indigenous peoples, adapting research and education system to include indigenous and local knowledge, engaging stake rights and knowledge holders and the public, as well as rethinking Arctic science in a post-COVID-19 world. And here I just wanted to attract your attention to a recent Nature paper by presidents of Arctic Science Association and indigenous scholars that kind of tells us some things that could be used to rethink our science enterprise in a post-COVID world. Next slide. While looking at a variety of topics represented, we sort of identify a number of themes where we had a good progress and where we can capitalize on existing success. They include science capacity building, building public resources, outreach, collaboration, coordination, networking, conferences and meetings, and education and training. At the same time, we also saw some areas where some progress has been made, but more efforts is needed urgently. They include indigenous and local capacity building, infrastructure and data, and funding coordination. Next slide, please. So if we talk about the areas of success, networking, collaboration, and coordination continue despite of difficulties associated with COVID-19. We have interesting and wonderful projects such as International Network of Terrestrial Research and Monitoring in the Arctic, EU Polar Net already mentioned several times, Forum of Arctic Research Operators. All of this initiative continued and thrived. There was some interesting initiative within jurisdictions, for example, U.S. Fulbright Arctic Initiative and Arctic Frost, that built networks between early career scholars around the Arctic. We also were able to connect through conferences and meetings despite difficult circumstances, including Arctic Science Summit Week, Arctic Observing Summit, the International Congress of Arctic Social Sciences that will take place in a few weeks from now. Next slide, please. Education and training, of course, we see a growing recognition that education needs to be an integral part of science projects. However, further investment are needed. And during the period between second and third science ministerials, we see the growth of short courses and field schools and workshops, international higher education, early career opportunities, and also investment in national higher education programs in various countries, which are, of course, very pleasing. Still, more needs to be done. Next slide, please. We also have investment in science capacity and resources, new and revising old. For example, State of the Arctic Science by the International Arctic Science Committee. The Polar Resource Book is being revised as we speak right now. EduArctic project that just was mentioned already today, and also as a one-stop shop for Arctic knowledge at the University of the Arctic. All of these are examples of good achievements that we have had in the last few years. Next slide, please. But there are a few areas where we need urgent attention. First is funding coordination. National programs are working to strengthen capacity and where possible to facilitate exchange and co-funding and collaboration. Still, more international coordination would be important, and better connecting research funding and local capacity building is an utmost important task. Next slide. And particular attention must be paid to indigenous and local capacity building. There's a growing number of projects focusing on building capacity in the Arctic as a region in general, as well as in indigenous and local communities. However, further investment is urgently needed in this regard. There have been processes of indigenizing operations in scientific organizations, which are very, very good trend. We also know, as discussed yesterday, that National Inuit Strategy for Research in Canada paved the way for others to look into how indigenous knowledge, indigenous college and rights holders could be part of that process. But again, attention and investment are needed in this area. Next slide, please. And lastly, infrastructure and data. A lot of data is being collected, and a lot of infrastructure is already in the Arctic, but we need more infrastructure, and especially investment in locally embedded, resilient science operations that are going to be resilient after the COVID-19 pandemic. We already have been successful in establishing centers and hubs in the Arctic, building field stations and icebreakers, as well as creating data infrastructure that not only supports open science, but also is respectful of indigenous knowledge, sovereignty, and ownership. These trends need to be continued further, and investment must be made to make sure that they proceed in the next few years. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share these results.